wife and I first started dating, we were reckless. Not in a way that harmed anyone directly, but we did some things that I would never do now. Things of questionable legality, in other words. For example, we would explore abandoned buildings and houses trying to find proof of ghosts. I never bought into any of that stuff. That was more of her deal, and I just went along with it because I liked the girl. Out of all the houses and buildings we explored, only one time was I left at a loss for words. I couldn't explain then what I saw, and I don't think I can explain now what I saw either. It was an extremely dark night outside, one of those cloudy nights that just makes everything feel so much darker. She had found this house that was not near anything. It was an old house that barely looked like it was standing. I was always sketched out to go inside these houses, not because I was scared of ghosts. I was sketched out to go inside because I never knew if these houses were going to collapse when I was inside. This house was in particularly rough shape. I had to kick down the front door, which was boarded up. Inside the door was what I assumed used to be a living room, except it was missing half the floor. In the middle of this room was a giant hole where the floor used to be. We took our flashlights and looked down the hole, and you could see what was left of a basement. I kept telling her that we should probably leave because this place clearly isn't safe. She didn't care. She kept telling me just to wait a minute. That was always her go-to line whenever I wanted to leave. She was sneaking around the house watching for holes, and I just stayed by the front door. I told her I was staying there because I didn't trust the floor. She laughed and called me a coward. A few minutes went by, and my curiosity got the better of me. I made my way into the other room where she was. The room was a mess, junk stacked to the ceiling. She was going through all the stuff trying to find remnants of the people who lived there. That was part of her routine. I wanted no part of that. She told me to check the upstairs. She must have known I didn't really want to do that because before I could even respond, she said that the sooner we search the entire house, the sooner we can leave. Reluctantly, I made my way upstairs. At any moment, I was sure I was going to fall through the floor. There was a room directly to the right at the top of the stairs. I went in there first. It was an old bedroom with a bed still in there. It was kind of depressing. The bed was still made, and on the bottom of the bed was a folded up bathrobe. It was like somebody just disappeared and left their home as is. I continued looking around the room, and it was just more junk everywhere. A lot of clothes, some old knickknacks that were falling apart, and furniture that looked like it might break if you touch it. There was this weird crawl space in the corner of the room. Sometimes we'd find treasure in these crawl spaces. I went inside, and it was weird. It was filled with a bunch of baby stuff, like unopened boxes of diapers and baby food. But the stuff was old, like really old, and covered in dust and cobwebs. Some of the baby food had clearly been gone through by rodents, not to mention it smelled horrible. Just as I was about to leave, I thought I could hear the sound of creaking. I used my flashlight to look around the entire crawl space. In the corner of the crawl space was another little opening. I couldn't believe I missed it a second ago. I crawled over and looked down the opening. It was a narrow path that looked like it went directly across the length of the house to the other bedroom. The creaking sound was clearly coming from down that way. I was a little too big to crawl down the narrow path, so I left the crawl space and started heading toward the other bedroom from the top of the stairs. The other bedroom was down the hall and to the left. As I got closer, I could still hear the creaking sound. It was getting louder the closer I got to the bedroom. My heart was racing, but not because I was scared. I was completely ready to be jumped by a horde of raccoons. When I was just a couple of feet away from the doorway, the sound was clear. I quietly walked through the doorway, and I almost fell over. A woman was sitting in a rocking chair, staring out the window. I didn't say anything at first. The back of the chair was facing me, so I could only see the top of her head and what looked like a long skirt on her legs. Slowly, she just rocked back and forth. I was trying to see the reflection of her face in the window, but it was just too dark to make out any details. I took one step toward the woman, and the floor creaked. Once she heard that noise, she instantly stopped rocking. I started to apologize and told this woman that we didn't know someone lived there. Before I could say anything else, she started to rock again, almost like she was completely unfazed that I was standing there. For some reason, instead of running, I took another step forward and asked if the woman was okay. As I took that step, she stopped rocking again. Then she stood up slowly. When she was standing in front of the rocking chair, I heard her voice. She didn't say anything. Instead, she just made this noise. It was like a low hum. Then, out of nowhere, she quickly turned around to face me. It made me jump, and I turned around and ran. I wish I could describe what I saw, but it happened so fast that I didn't really see any details of her face. All I could tell was that she was old and her skin looked wrinkled. I ran downstairs screaming that we needed to leave. I tried telling my girlfriend that we weren't alone and that somebody still lived there. She just laughed. She was so confident that I was messing with her. I was pleading with her that we needed to leave, that someone was upstairs in the bedroom. Instead of listening to me, she wanted to see for herself. I begged her not to go upstairs, but she didn't listen. I was screaming at this point to please leave, and she just continued to ignore me. I followed her upstairs and watched her make her way to the bedroom at the end of the hall. When she got to the doorway, I heard her say, "Oh my God." I ran to the end of the hallway just in case, and as I got to the doorway, she just started to laugh. Inside the room was the rocking chair, but no woman. She asked if I was scared of the rocking chair and continued to laugh at me. I told her that there was a woman there just a minute ago, but she just kept laughing at me. She went into the room and looked all around. There was no old woman. I swore to her that I saw an old lady, but she just continued to laugh at me. She walked by me and left the room. As she walked away, she said we could leave. We were both walking towards the stairs, and then we both heard it. The creaking sound again. The sound of the rocking chair going back and forth. She looked at me and froze. There was no doubt about it. It was clearly the sound of the chair. She mouthed the words to me, "What is that?" as we both stood at the top of the stairs. She took a few steps toward the bedroom and could hear the woman humming. It was like she was humming a melody. She got to the doorway and saw with her own eyes the rocking chair with someone sitting on the chair and humming to herself. She didn't engage with her. She just turned and ran, and we both ran out the door after that. She started screaming once we got to the car. She kept asking what the hell we just saw, and I didn't say anything. I wanted to look back at the house as we drove off and look at the window to see if I could see anyone standing there, but I was too terrified. I truly have no idea what we encountered that night. Maybe I really did have a brush with something paranormal. I know how unlikely that is, but who knows? Maybe that kind of thing really does exist. I suppose it could have easily just been a very old woman who still lived inside a filthy and decomposing house, but I don't fully buy that. I mean, the door was boarded up, and there was a giant hole in the living room. Not exactly ideal living situations. Not long ago, I brought this story up to my wife and asked her if she remembered. She obviously did. We drove to the abandoned house, and it had been torn down. There was no house there. Not even any remnants of a house. I try to replay that night in my head all the time. I try to remember what I can about that woman's face. I tell myself that it was just an old woman, but something in my gut tells me that's not the case.
Back in senior year, there was one place everyone in my town whispered about like it was cursed. People called it the Barracks. Not the real name, obviously. Nobody used the real name anymore. I'm 31 now, and I still avoid driving near that area at night. For obvious reasons, I'm changing everyone's names in this story. The place itself was an abandoned Air Force housing complex hidden deep in the woods outside my hometown. It dated back to World War II and supposedly stayed active through the Cold War. From what I later found online, entire military families lived there at one point. Schools, churches, playgrounds, rows of identical homes. Basically a small neighborhood built in complete isolation. But by the late 80s, the government shut it down and just left it there. No demolition, no redevelopment, nothing. It sat rotting in the woods for decades. Growing up, every kid in town knew the stories. People claimed there were underground tunnels beneath the church. Others said soldiers disappeared there during secret experiments. There were stories about cults, missing hikers, strange lights in the trees. Most of it was probably nonsense. At least that's what I used to think. When I was around 13, My older cousin came home one night, completely pale, after supposedly sneaking into the property with his friends. I remember him sitting at our kitchen table, refusing to look out the window, while he told us about hearing screaming inside one of the abandoned houses. He swore they found a chapel with a locked basement door and something banging underneath it. I didn't believe him, but it planted something in my head. For years, my friends and I talked about exploring the place ourselves once we got cars. It became one of those stupid teenage bucket list things you joke about constantly, but never actually do. Mostly because nobody knew exactly where it was. All we knew was that it was somewhere near the old airport property, surrounded by restricted land and faded military fencing. Plus, even abandoned, it was technically federal property. Getting caught there sounded like the kind of mistake that could ruin your future. Still, we kept talking about it. Then one night during spring break of senior year, my friend Mason texted our group chat saying he finally found the entrance. None of us believed him. He claimed one of his cousins had shown him an old service road hidden behind a tree line off the highway. I thought he was bluffing. So around 10:45 p.m., 4 of us piled into my SUV to prove him wrong. Me, Mason, Tyler, and Eric. The drive took maybe 20 minutes. At first it just felt stupid and funny. We were blasting music, making jokes, talking about how disappointed we'd be when the haunted military base turned out to be an empty patch of woods. But once we reached the area near the airport, everything changed. The roads became darker, empty, no streetlights, no houses, nothing. Mason kept telling me to slow down every few seconds. I think this is it. No, wait, maybe here. He sounded way less confident now that we were actually there. Eventually, we spotted a cracked asphalt road almost completely swallowed by weeds and overhanging branches. There was an old rusted "No trespassing" sign leaning sideways in the dirt like it had been hit years earlier. That should have been enough to turn around. Instead, we drove in. I remember Tyler laughing and saying, "We've talked about this for like 10 years. No backing out now." The deeper we went, the stranger it got. At first, we passed random junk dumped along the roadside. Old mattresses, broken chairs, dressers, children's toys. Then we reached an abandoned security gate stretched across the road. I got out and lifted it manually while Eric kept nervously scanning the woods with his flashlight. I wish we had left right there. About a minute later, the trees suddenly opened up, and there it was, the barracks. Rows of dark homes sitting silently beneath the moonlight. It honestly didn't feel real. It looked like a neighborhood frozen in time after the apocalypse. Some houses were collapsed in on themselves while others looked weirdly untouched, like families had just vanished overnight. A few still had curtains hanging in the windows. One even had a child's tricycle lying in the driveway. That bothered me more than anything else. There was no wind, no bugs, no sound, just this dead silence hanging over everything. I parked near the old chapel in the center of the complex. The building looked wrong immediately. The stained glass windows were shattered, but the giant wooden doors were slightly open, like someone had walked in recently. We grabbed our phones and flashlights and started exploring. Inside the chapel, graffiti covered every wall. Beer bottles and trash littered the floor. The air smelled moldy and wet. Mason kept joking around, trying to lighten the mood, but nobody was really laughing anymore. The whole place felt occupied. Not haunted, occupied, like we were somewhere we absolutely were not supposed to be. After leaving the chapel, we started checking some of the nearby houses. One home looked like it had been destroyed by a tornado. Another still had furniture inside. That was the creepiest part. Seeing actual living rooms and kitchens still sitting there after decades made it feel less abandoned and more interrupted. Eric was freaking out the entire time. He kept whispering that somebody was watching us. We told him to calm down. Eric was always paranoid. But then we heard it. A noise from upstairs. Not a settling house noise. Not pipes. Footsteps. Slow wooden creaks. One after another. Everyone froze instantly. I remember staring at Tyler because his face changed immediately. He heard it too. The footsteps stopped. Mason suddenly yelled, "Hello." The second he did that, the entire house went dead silent. No movement. Nothing. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds, barely breathing. Then Eric quietly said, "We need to go? Right now." Nobody argued with him this time. The atmosphere had completely changed. It felt like whoever, or whatever, was upstairs now knew exactly where we were. We headed toward the front door fast, but tried not to run. and that's when Eric grabbed my arm so hard it actually hurt. He pointed toward the side window. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw them. Shadows. 3 distinct shadows moving across the outside wall of the neighboring house. Human silhouettes. Walking slowly. Circling toward us. Every single one of us saw it. No question. No debate. Someone was outside. And they were close. I carefully peeked through the window. I caught a glimpse of movement disappearing behind the backyard fence. Then another shape. Tall. Standing completely still between 2 houses. Watching ours. I whispered, "Run to the car." Nobody hesitated. We exploded out the front door and sprinted down the street toward my SUV. I could hear footsteps behind us somewhere in the dark. Not running. Walking fast. Then Eric screamed. I looked up and nearly crashed into Tyler. Standing beside my SUV was a woman. At least, I think it was a woman. She was insanely tall and painfully thin, wearing what looked like an old gray nurse uniform covered in dirt. Her hair hung over her face in wet strands. And she had my back passenger door open. One leg was already inside the vehicle, like she was climbing in to wait for us. The second Eric screamed, she slowly turned her head toward us. I'll never forget that face. Her skin looked almost unnaturally pale in the moonlight, and her eyes looked completely black. Not shadowed. Black. Then she bolted. Not toward the woods. Toward the chapel. She disappeared inside the church doors without making a sound. We reached the SUV seconds later. I threw the doors open and checked the back seat first because I genuinely thought someone might already be inside. Empty. Thank God. We jumped in and I floored it. I almost lost control twice trying to get back down that dirt road. Nobody spoke for the first 5 minutes. Eric was literally crying in the back seat. Tyler kept looking behind us like he expected headlights to appear. When we finally got back into town, we started trying to explain what we saw. The logical explanation is probably homeless people using the abandoned base as shelter. That part makes sense, but the woman doesn't. Nothing about her makes sense, especially the way she moved, or why she was trying to get inside my SUV without making a sound. Years later, I looked the place up online and found out the entire complex had finally been demolished sometime around 2015. There are barely any traces left now, just overgrown land. But every once in a while, I still think about one detail that keeps me awake longer than it should. We explored that property for almost an hour. Not once did we see another person. No fires. No flashlights. No voices. Nothing. Which means whoever those people were, they were already there, watching us the entire time.
I still remember the first night we moved into that neighborhood in northern Ohio. I was 13, awkward as hell, and way too excited about finally living somewhere with kids my age. The street was perfect for a teenager. Basketball hoops in driveways, bikes scattered across lawns, people always outside. Compared to our tiny old apartment, this place felt huge. Everything about it was great, except for the man living next door. Every neighborhood has one. The old guy everyone avoids. His name was Mr. Grayson. He lived alone in a faded blue house with dead grass and permanently closed curtains. I swear nobody ever saw him grocery shopping or talking to anyone. He just existed there, and he hated us. The second we stepped outside to play football or ride bikes, he'd start slamming on his windows like a maniac. Sometimes he screamed so loudly we could hear him through the glass. Get away from my house. The weird thing was, we never even touched his yard. We stayed on the sidewalk, but that didn't matter. If we got too close to the edge of his driveway, he'd lose his mind. One time my friend Marcus accidentally rolled a basketball near his mailbox, and before Marcus could even grab it, the old man burst onto his porch holding a shovel like he was ready to kill somebody. After that, everybody on the block avoided his house completely. At first we joked about him constantly. We called him the Watcher because no matter what time we went outside, he'd somehow already be staring through the curtains waiting for us. It honestly felt like he never slept. This went on for months. Then one day, it stopped. No yelling, no banging, no movement behind the curtains. Nothing. At first we thought maybe he was finally hospitalized or moved away. I even remember joking with Marcus that the old guy probably died sitting in his recliner. Looking back, I wish I never said that. About 5 weeks later, Marcus stayed over at my house on a Friday night. Around 4 in the morning, we woke up to flashing lights bleeding through my bedroom curtains. Police cars, an ambulance. We rushed to the window and watched from upstairs. And then we saw them wheel out a black body bag. Even from a distance, you know what that is immediately. I can still remember the feeling in my stomach when I realized the old man was actually dead. The worst part? The cops looked disturbed. One officer kept covering his nose with his sleeve while talking to another cop. That's when Marcus whispered something that made my skin crawl. What if he died weeks ago? I think deep down we both already knew. After that night, the house stayed abandoned. Not empty. Abandoned. There's a difference. Nobody came to clean it. Nobody packed his belongings. His furniture stayed exactly where it was, collecting dust behind those dark windows. Apparently, he had a daughter living somewhere in Arizona, but she never came back for the property. So the house just sat there, rotting. And because my bedroom window faced directly toward his upstairs room, I could see inside almost every night. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the dark hallway for way too long. I always felt like something in that house was staring back. By sophomore year, the abandoned house became a running joke between my friends. Whenever someone stayed over, we'd tell ghost stories about Mr. Grayson haunting the place. Marcus especially hated it. That dude scared easily. You could literally whisper his name in the dark and he'd panic. One night we had a group of friends over while my parents were out. We were watching horror movies, messing around, talking trash, and eventually the conversation drifted back to the house next door. That's when Marcus finally snapped. "If you think it's so funny," he said, "go inside." Everybody immediately started hyping it up. At first I refused because breaking into an abandoned house sounded stupid. But once everybody started calling me scared, my ego took over. So I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. I remember the air feeling freezing cold, even though it was the middle of July. The front door was locked. The back door too. But beside the kitchen, there was a small sliding window cracked slightly open. The second I pushed it wider, a horrible smell hit me. Not mold, not garbage, something worse. A thick rotten smell that instantly made me gag. I almost backed out right there. But my friends were watching from my bedroom window across the yard, so I climbed inside. The house was pitch black except for moonlight leaking through dusty curtains. Everything was untouched. A recliner faced an old TV covered in gray dust. Reading glasses rested on the armrest like the old man had just stood up for a second and never returned. In the kitchen, there was still a mug sitting on the table. Inside it was hardened black sludge that used to be coffee. That room smelled the strongest. I started imagining the old man collapsing there alone, decomposing in the dark while nobody checked on him. My flashlight shook in my hand. I moved toward the hallway leading upstairs when I heard something. A heavy thud, not from outside, from inside the house. I froze instantly. The sound was so loud it felt like somebody slammed into a wall upstairs. I held my breath, waiting for another noise. Nothing. Absolute silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I slowly backed away, trying not to make noise, and glanced toward the upstairs window facing my house. My friends were still there waving at me. But Marcus wasn't laughing anymore. He looked confused, like he'd seen something behind me. I didn't wait to find out what. I sprinted back through the kitchen window and practically dove into my backyard. When I got inside, everybody started asking questions at once. I told them about the smell, the noise, the feeling that somebody else was in there. Most of them brushed it off. Old houses make noises all the time, right? That's what I kept telling myself too. Until later that night. Around 2 in the morning, Marcus shook me awake violently. "Do you hear that?" At first I was annoyed. Then I heard it. Knock. Knock. 2 slow knocks. Coming from outside. We both turned toward the window. The abandoned house sat completely dark. Then Marcus whispered something that made my blood run cold. "There's somebody upstairs." I looked toward the second floor hallway window. At first I thought it was a shadow, but then it moved. A tall silhouette stood motionless in the doorway upstairs. Too tall. Way too tall. It just stood there in complete darkness. Marcus started panicking, whispering over and over that it was watching us. The others woke up from the noise and crowded around the window too. Every single one of us saw it. Then slowly, the figure moved forward, not walking normally, gliding. It crossed the upstairs hallway until it reached the bedroom window directly facing us. And stopped. I still can't explain what terrified me most about it. Maybe the fact that it never moved its arms. Maybe the unnatural way its head tilted sideways. Or maybe the fact that even from across the yard, I knew it was staring directly at me. Nobody in the room said a word. We couldn't. The figure stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it slowly backed away into the darkness until it completely disappeared. The house went silent again. None of us slept after that. About 8 months later, a woman finally came to clear out the property. Turns out she was Mr. Grayson's daughter. My dad talked to her while she loaded dumpsters outside. Apparently, she hadn't spoken to her father in over a decade. But one thing she said still bothers me. She told my dad her father had severe paranoia near the end of his life. He constantly claimed there was someone else living inside the house with him, especially upstairs. She thought he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. But sometimes I still think about that silhouette standing in the upstairs window. Because whatever we saw that night, it wasn't an old coat rack, and it definitely wasn't my imagination. 5 people saw it. 5.